I had always believed that life, at least mine, was perfectly scripted. I had everything I could ever need: good health, a career I loved, and a family that filled me with pride. Naomi, my wife of 18 years, and I had built something solid, something that seemed unshakable. Together, we had created a life that others envied. We had one daughter, Emily, a 16-year-old girl who was everything to me. She was bright, passionate, and full of life. Music was her world. She played the piano like her fingers were born to press those keys, and I couldn't help but feel proud whenever I heard her practice. I was a senior architect, and while my job was demanding, it offered a sense of fulfillment that Naomi often said she admired. Naomi herself was a successful financial advisor, always calm and composed, a woman who could turn numbers into something tangible, something valuable. We were a perfect match in many ways. She balanced my creativity with her practicality, and together we made life look easy. But deep down there were cracks I couldn't see, cracks that had started to form long before I ever noticed. We lived in a quiet suburb of Austin, Texas, a neighborhood that reflected everything we had worked for. The house was a dream, a 4-bedroom home with a spacious backyard where I spent weekends working on my old cars. Emily would often join me in the garage, her fingers stained with oil as we tinkered with engines or admired the cars at local shows. She was my partner in those moments, the child who looked up to me, the daughter who sought my guidance. Naomi, on the other hand, always seemed to be working. Whether it was on her career or maintaining the house, she was always busy, always perfecting something. I never questioned it. She had her own way of doing things, and I admired her for it. I would come home after long days at the firm, and there she would be, sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered around her, her focus intense. Naomi had that calm intensity about her, so different from the rest of the world. She seemed unshakable, like nothing could ever break her. And then one day it all started to change. It wasn't dramatic at first. Naomi started becoming more distant. She'd zone out while I talked about my day, her eyes wandering as if she was somewhere else, with someone else. At first I didn't think much of it. Everyone has their moments, right? But the distance grew. The spark in her eyes, an energy I once knew so well, started to fade. I began asking myself, what is going on? I tried to address it directly with her a few times. "Naomi, is everything okay?" I'd ask, always brushing it off when she'd say, "Of course, Jack, I'm fine." But I knew she wasn't. I could feel it in the air between us, like there was a silent conversation happening, one I wasn't invited to. Naomi had always been the type to keep things close to the chest, but this was different. It wasn't just a bad day or a stressful week. This felt like something more profound. But I didn't push too hard. We had a life, after all, we had everything we needed. A beautiful daughter, a successful marriage, a house that felt like a home. Nothing could really be wrong, could it? It wasn't until that one Friday evening, as I walked through the front door at my usual 6 p.m., that everything changed. Naomi was already home, but there was something off. No smells of dinner wafting from the kitchen. No sign of Emily's voice greeting me at the door. I assumed they were out, maybe with friends, so I went upstairs to change. But as I stepped into the bedroom, I froze. Naomi had laid out an outfit on the bed. A little black dress, sexy stockings, and 6-inch heels. It looked like something she'd wear for a night out, but she hadn't mentioned anything about going out. I felt a tightness in my chest as I wondered, why didn't she tell me? When I walked into the bathroom, she was there putting on makeup. I stood still, watching her, and then I asked, "Where are we going, sweetheart?" She didn't turn around. "We're not going anywhere," Naomi replied, her voice casual as if nothing was wrong. "Then why the dress?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "I'm going out," she said, finally meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Out? With who?" The question was out of my mouth before I could stop it. Naomi hesitated. "I'm going on a date tonight. I'll be back in the morning." "Date?" My mind was racing. "A date? And you're going to spend the night with him?" She nodded, brushing her hair back. "If it goes well, yes." I couldn't process the words. A date? My wife spending the night with another man? "No way," I snapped. "You think I'll just let you do that? If you want to cheat on me, we're done. You can wait for the divorce." She turned to face me then, her eyes cold. "There's no divorce, Jack. I just need this one night to remind myself that I'm still attractive to other men." Her words stung, cutting deeper than anything I'd ever felt. She was talking about our life together, our family, our marriage, like it meant nothing. "You really think this is just a one-night thing? And if I let you, we'll just move on like nothing happened?" Naomi's expression softened slightly, as if trying to soothe me, but there was no warmth in her gaze. "If you really loved me, you'd let me do this. It's just one night." "If I loved you?" The anger inside me flared. "You're breaking our vows. You think I'll just stand here and watch you destroy everything?" She shrugged. "It's not a big deal. I promise it won't happen again." But I knew better. Promises, that's all they were. Words that meant nothing. I couldn't stand it any longer. The woman I loved, my wife, the mother of my child, was standing in front of me telling me she was going to betray me and I couldn't stop her. She walked past me toward the door, blowing me a kiss as she left. "I'll be back in the morning," she said, her voice almost cheerful. "I'll be a loving wife again. Don't worry." I watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her, and the house went silent. That was the moment I knew everything had changed. I couldn't go back to pretending nothing was wrong. She was already gone. Over the following months, Naomi's distance became impossible to ignore. At first it was subtle, small things, a lack of warmth in her touch, a gaze that lingered just a bit too long on her phone. But as time passed, I could feel the space between us growing, like an invisible wall slowly being built. I began to notice the small things more. Naomi no longer laughed at my jokes like she used to. Conversations that once felt effortless had turned into awkward silences. At dinner, she would be on her phone more often than engaging with me or Emily. Even our weekends together, once filled with shared moments in the garage or at the farmer's market, started feeling like we were just two people passing through the same space. I kept trying to convince myself it was just a phase, a busy period at work, a temporary lull in our lives. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Naomi wasn't just tired or distracted. It was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. And the hardest part was that she wasn't giving me anything to work with. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush it off. "Everything's fine, Jack," she'd say with that smile, the one that used to reassure me but now felt more like a mask. "You're imagining things." But I wasn't imagining things. The more she pulled away, the more I felt like I was losing her. It wasn't just physical distance. It was emotional. I could feel it in the way she looked at me when I spoke, or the way she withdrew when I tried to touch her. I was no longer the man she came to for support. I was just another person in her life, like a roommate, distant and almost irrelevant. As the days passed, I found myself making excuses for her behavior. Work stress, family obligations, the world outside our home, anything to explain why Naomi had become so distant. I wanted to believe that it wasn't anything personal, that it wasn't me. But the truth was harder to swallow than I was willing to admit. Naomi was shutting me out, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through the walls she was building around herself. One evening, as we sat in the living room after dinner, I caught her staring out the window, lost in thought. I could almost feel the weight of the silence between us. "Naomi," I said, my voice breaking the stillness. "What's going on? This isn't like you. You've been distant for months now. Are we okay?" She turned her head slowly to face me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might say something, anything, that would reassure me. But instead, she just shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that stung more than any words she could have said. "I'm fine, Jack," she replied, her voice flat. "You're overthinking things, as usual. I'm just tired, that's all." But I wasn't overthinking. I knew something had changed. I saw it in the way she carried herself now, in the way she pulled away when I tried to hold her hand or kiss her goodnight. The warmth that had once been there had faded, and in its place was an icy distance that I couldn't break. And then there were the nights, long stretches where she'd stay up late in the study, her laptop open and her phone buzzing constantly. I knew she was busy with work, but it was always so urgent, so important, far more important than spending time with me, with us. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it was going to be from now on. Was this the beginning of the end? Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it wasn't just work. Naomi had always been so dedicated to her career, but this was different. She was too detached, too absorbed in whatever was consuming her. It was like she was trying to hide something from me. But what? And why? One night after I had come home late from a meeting, I found Naomi in the kitchen, her back to me as she poured herself a glass of wine. The kitchen was dim, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I watched her for a moment, trying to read her. When she finally turned around and saw me, there was nothing in her eyes. No warmth, no love, no connection. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately. She just stared at me for a long time, her eyes flicking over my face before she took a slow sip of her wine. "I'm fine, Jack," she said again, her words clipped. "I'm just tired. I need some space." Space. The word hit me like a slap in the face. Space. The very thing that had begun to feel like a chasm between us. I nodded, but deep down my heart sank. I wasn't sure how much more I could take of this, how much more of Naomi pulling away, of me chasing after her only to watch her retreat further into herself. And yet, I still held on. I still hoped, foolishly perhaps, that she would come back to me, that the woman I had once known and loved would return. But with each passing day, that hope became harder and harder to maintain. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly losing her, and I had no idea why. The tension had been building up for weeks, thick and suffocating. Every day it felt like Naomi was slipping further away from me, like a thread slowly unraveling. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that it was just a phase, just a temporary disconnect caused by stress or the demands of life. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. My instincts were screaming at me, but I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that feeling. It wasn't until that Friday evening that everything came crashing down. I came home at my usual time, expecting the quiet of the house to welcome me. But there was something off as soon as I stepped through the door. There was no smell of dinner, no Emily rushing to greet me like she usually did. I thought they might be out, maybe spending time together or with friends. But when I walked upstairs to change, I froze in the doorway of our bedroom. There it was, a set of clothes laid out on the bed, a black dress, sexy, tight, and revealing, with stockings and a pair of 6-inch heels. I stood there, the blood draining from my face, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was this out? Why hadn't she said anything? The outfit was clearly meant for a night out, but Naomi hadn't said a word about going anywhere. My heart began to race as the pieces started to fall into place, one after the other. The lack of affection, the long hours spent away from me, the way she'd become more secretive, more distant. I had tried to rationalize it, but now it all made sense. She was planning to go out, not with me, not with anyone I knew. I walked toward the bathroom and Naomi was there, applying makeup. She glanced at me briefly, but didn't say a word. The silence between us stretched, and I couldn't take it any longer. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice steady, but I could feel the anger creeping up behind my words. Naomi didn't look at me as she dabbed foundation on her face. "We aren't going anywhere," she said flatly, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "I'm going out." "Going out?" I felt my pulse quicken. "Where? And why didn't you tell me?" She finally turned to look at me, her expression cool, almost like she had no idea why I was upset. "I'm going on a date tonight, Jack. I'll probably be gone until tomorrow." A wave of nausea hit me. A date? My mind couldn't process it fast enough. A date? With who? The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the way they sounded. But I couldn't hold it back. I needed answers. Naomi looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "With Clarence. You know him. He's been flirting with me for a while now. I've finally decided to see where it goes." Her voice was casual, as if she was discussing something trivial, like picking out groceries for the week. But the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Clarence. I had met him a few times, just a colleague of Naomi's, or so I thought. But now here he was, not just a casual acquaintance, but the man she had been seeing behind my back. She was going to spend the night with him. And I wasn't invited to the conversation. I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. How had I not seen it coming? How had I missed the signs? Naomi's behavior, her distance, the secrecy, none of it was a coincidence. And now she was telling me to my face that she was going to sleep with another man. I had trusted her. I had loved her. No, I said, my voice suddenly hard. No, Naomi, this is not happening. If you want to cheat on me, fine, but you can leave. You can walk out the door and we're done. This marriage is over. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to understand the weight of what she was doing. But Naomi didn't seem fazed. She was calm, almost indifferent. I'm not going anywhere, Jack, she said, smoothing out her dress with a slight shrug. I just need this one night. I've been feeling invisible. I need to remind myself that I'm still desirable. Clarence is just someone who makes me feel wanted. Her words were like daggers, each one driving deeper into my chest. She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't even ashamed. I had spent years building this life with her, and now she was treating it like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. If you go through with this, I said, my voice shaking with anger, we're done. Don't come back. Don't come crawling back to me after this. I won't be here. Naomi looked at me unfazed. You're making too much of this. It's just one night, Jack. If you loved me, you'd understand. You wouldn't make a big deal out of it. If I loved you? The words felt like poison in my mouth. She had broken every promise we had made to each other. She had shattered everything we built, and now she was asking me to let it go. I took a step toward the door, my heart racing. There's nothing left to understand, I said, more to myself than to her. I'm done. She turned her back to me, dismissing me like I was nothing more than a nuisance. Fine, she said with a sigh. I'll be back tomorrow, and when I get back, everything will be fine. But I knew it wouldn't be. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As the door closed behind her, I stood there in the silence, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. Naomi wasn't just going out for the night. She was walking away from everything we had, and she didn't even care. The night Naomi walked out of our house to meet Clarence, I was consumed with a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of betrayal. I sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where she had stood just hours before. How could she do this? The question echoed in my mind over and over like a drumbeat I couldn't escape. Everything I had believed about our marriage, about our family, suddenly felt like a lie. She said she needed one night to remind herself that she was still desirable, but it felt more like an excuse to indulge in something deeper. My mind kept racing. Was it just about sex, or had she been emotionally involved with Clarence for much longer? How long had this been going on behind my back? The hours dragged on. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept staring at my phone, waiting for her to call or text. What was she doing right now? Was she with him? Every minute felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. By the time she came home, I had already made up my mind. I had been patient. I had asked her what was going on. I had tried to reason with her, but now I was done. I wasn't going to beg for her love anymore. She had chosen her path, and now I had to deal with the consequences. When Naomi walked through the door, I didn't even look at her. I could hear the click of her heels on the hardwood floor, and I could smell the faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. It was all I needed to confirm what I already knew, what I had already feared. She stood there, watching me from the doorway. I'm home, she said, her voice light, almost too light, as if nothing had happened. I stood up slowly, turning to face her. How was your night? My voice was cold, controlled. Naomi hesitated for a moment, then shrugged, as if the question didn't matter. It was fine, she said, glancing down at the floor. I told you it would be fine. I just needed to get away for a bit. Get away? My anger flared. You didn't need to get away, Naomi. You needed to go screw another man. That's what this was, wasn't it? She flinched, but quickly recovered, her eyes flashing. You don't understand. It's not like that. No, I said, stepping closer to her. I understand perfectly. You needed to feel wanted. You needed someone else's attention, someone younger, someone who isn't me. How long has this been going on? Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked down at the ground, shifting uneasily. For a moment it felt like she was going to say something, something that might explain everything. But then she spoke, her voice low and reluctant. It's been going on for months, Jack. Clarence and I—" She stopped as if she realized what she was saying. I felt my stomach drop. Months? I couldn't breathe. Months, I repeated, my voice hoarse. Months. You've been lying to me for months, and I had no idea. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, the words coming out quickly as if she was trying to justify herself. I thought it was just something that would pass, but it didn't, and I couldn't keep pretending. I stared at her, my mind reeling. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. My hands balled into fists, but I couldn't even think of a response. What was there to say? You broke everything, Naomi. That's what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. My throat was tight, constricted by the weight of the hurt, the anger, the sense of defeat. You don't understand, she said again, her voice quieter this time. I never meant for this to happen, but it did. I couldn't stand feeling like I was invisible anymore. Invisible? The word hit me like a slap in the face. She was telling me that our marriage, our life together, didn't matter enough for her to stick around. The truth was too much to bear, but I had to hear it. She had chosen this. You don't get it, Naomi, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. You've shattered everything. Everything we built. Everything we had. It's gone. You chose him. You chose this. And I can't forgive that. Naomi's face crumbled slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by something else. Defensiveness. Frustration. I'm sorry, Jack. I am. But I can't change what happened. I needed this. I needed to feel something again. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I was right here, Naomi, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I was right here loving you, being there for you, and you didn't even care. You went looking for something else. And now I'm supposed to just accept it? No, she said, shaking her head. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did, I replied, my voice tight. It did go this far, and now you're telling me you can't fix it. You can't fix what you've broken. You've already made your choice. Naomi was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching mine, but I couldn't see the woman I had married anymore. I couldn't see the person who had promised to love me forever. Instead, all I saw was someone who had broken our vows, shattered the trust we'd built, and walked away without a second thought. I'm done, Naomi, I said, finally finding my voice. I'm done. You can't come back from this, and I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when I know it's not. She stared at me, a tear slipping down her cheek, but there was nothing left to say. I had nothing left to give. The house felt colder the moment Naomi left. It wasn't just the absence of her presence, though that alone was enough to make the space feel empty. No, it was the weight of her betrayal that clung to the walls. Every room I entered, every surface I touched, reminded me of her departure and the sharp pain of what she had done. I tried to sleep that night, but the bed felt like a foreign place. I rolled over, expecting to feel Naomi's warmth, but there was nothing. Her side of the bed was cold, and the silence was deafening. My mind wouldn't shut off, and the images kept coming. Naomi smiling at me before she left, the look in her eyes when she told me she was going to see Clarence. I couldn't shake the thought that everything I had believed in was now a lie. The next morning I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wallow in my anger and confusion. I had spent years building this life, this family, and Naomi had torn it apart in a single night. I had no idea where to go from here, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let her continue to walk all over me. As I sat at the kitchen table that morning, a cup of coffee in my hand, I thought about the future. I thought about the life I had worked so hard to create. The house, the career, our daughter Emily, who still hadn't fully grasped the gravity of what had happened. I couldn't let Naomi's actions define me. I couldn't let her drag me down into the mess she had created. I stood up, the decision becoming clearer with each passing second. I had to take control. I had to make sure that I didn't lose everything, not just my family, but my dignity. I went to my home office, pulled up the computer, and started digging through the financial accounts. I couldn't let Naomi have it all. She had betrayed me, and now I had to protect what was mine. It wasn't just about money, though. There was a part of me that needed to feel like I was still in control, like I still had something left. I began transferring our joint savings into a separate account in my name. It felt wrong, like I was stabbing myself in the back, but I couldn't stop. I knew it was the right thing to do. After everything she had done, Naomi didn't deserve to have control over our finances, over anything. I had worked hard for every penny we had, and I wasn't going to let her take it without a fight. The next step was more difficult. I contacted my lawyer. I wasn't sure what the divorce process would look like, but I knew I needed to be prepared. I needed to make sure that Naomi didn't walk away with everything while I was left with nothing. The lawyer's voice was steady on the phone, and I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me as we discussed the next steps. There was no turning back now. The moment I called him, I knew it was over. Naomi's betrayal had sealed our fate. But it wasn't just about the money or the house or anything material. It was about what Naomi had taken from me. Trust, love, respect. Those things couldn't be replaced. No matter what happened with the divorce, I knew that. No amount of money or assets could bring back what I had lost. Later that day, I moved into the guest bedroom. It wasn't the grand gesture I thought it would be. It was just a simple act of reclaiming my space, my life. The master bedroom, the one we had shared for years, was now her territory. She had violated that space, and I couldn't bear to stay there any longer. As I unpacked my things into the guest room, I realized just how much Naomi's betrayal had affected me. Every little action I took, every decision I made, felt like it was a direct response to what she had done. I wasn't just rearranging my things, I was rearranging my life. I couldn't be the same man I had been the day before. That man had been naive, trusting. This new version of me, the one standing in the guest room alone, wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of him again. I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to Naomi. She hadn't apologized, not really. Her words, "I never meant to hurt you," felt hollow. She had meant to hurt me. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have slept with another man behind my back. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have thrown away everything we had for something as fleeting as a moment of validation. But I couldn't dwell on that. I had to move forward. I had to make sure that whatever came next, I was ready. The divorce wouldn't be easy, I knew that, but I couldn't allow myself to crumble under the weight of it. Naomi had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I turned to Emily's school photos on the desk, her smiling face reminding me that I still had something to fight for. No matter what happened with Naomi, I was still her father. I had to be strong for her, even if it meant swallowing the bitter pill of a broken marriage. The next step was clear. I had to take Naomi to court. I had to make sure that I wasn't left with nothing. I wasn't going to let her walk away with all the power, with all the control. She had taken enough from me already. Now it was time for me to take back what was mine. It was almost dawn when I heard the front door creak open. Naomi had been gone for the entire night, and I had spent the hours in between running through every scenario in my head, trying to make sense of the chaos she had left behind. The sound of her returning was almost surreal. Part of me had convinced myself she might not come back at all, but there she was, stepping through the door as if nothing had happened. She was too calm, too composed. It made my stomach churn. The night she had spent with Clarence had been weighing on me, and I hadn't been able to get a single moment of rest. But Naomi was back now, standing in the hallway, her shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I didn't know what to expect, but I certainly wasn't ready for the ease in her voice when she spoke. "I'm home," she said lightly, almost as if nothing had changed. I didn't turn around to greet her. I couldn't. I felt numb, but underneath the numbness there was a boiling rage that I couldn't ignore. Naomi had shattered everything we had worked for, and now she was acting like she was simply returning from a night out with friends. She had taken a piece of my soul with her when she left, and now she was standing here acting like nothing had happened. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Naomi paused as if calculating her next move. "I told you. I needed to get away for a bit," she replied, her voice clipped. I couldn't hold back anymore. I spun around to face her, my eyes locking onto hers with the intensity of a man who had been betrayed. "Is that what you call it? Getting away? You spent the night with another man, Naomi. You've been lying to me for months. And you think this is just something I'll accept?" My voice wavered with a mix of anger and hurt, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to let her see me break. Naomi's expression flickered for a moment. It was a subtle shift, but I saw it. The faintest trace of guilt before she masked it. She took a step toward me, her hands raised slightly as if she expected me to soften. "Jack, please, you're blowing this out of proportion." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the stillness of the room. "Blowing it out of proportion? You slept with another man, Naomi. How much more to the point do you want me to be?" My fists clenched by my sides. Every inch of me was screaming at her. I wanted to tell her everything I felt, everything that had been building up inside of me, but I couldn't. There was no point anymore. Naomi's eyes softened, the facade of indifference beginning to crumble. She took another step closer, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen. It was a mistake, and I'm not going to make excuses for it. But please, Jack, I love you. I want us to work through this." I took a step back, shaking my head slowly. "No, you don't get to say that to me now. You don't get to walk back in here and act like it was just a mistake. It wasn't just a mistake, Naomi. It was a choice. And you made it. You chose him over me." Her eyes filled with frustration and something else. Regret, maybe, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and no amount of regret could undo what had happened. "I wasn't thinking clearly," she murmured, her voice shaky now, almost pleading. I felt so invisible, Jack. So unappreciated. And Clarence, he made me feel like I mattered again." The words hit me like a slap. She didn't even try to disguise it. She admitted it all. The desperation, the lies, the betrayal. The tears that started to form in her eyes only made me more disgusted. I had loved this woman, had built a life with her, and now I was standing here watching her try to justify her actions with excuses. "You think that justifies what you did?" I asked, my voice cold as ice. "You think that makes it okay?" She stood there, silent now, the weight of the realization finally sinking in. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life around, was now a stranger standing in front of me, trying to piece together something that could never be repaired. I could feel the anger rising again, but I was done. I couldn't do this anymore. "You broke it, Naomi," I said, my voice steady but final. "You broke everything, and you don't get to come back from that." Her face paled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, almost, but I quickly shoved that feeling away. She had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. "I can't do this," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "We're done. I don't want you here anymore." Naomi didn't move, didn't say a word. She just stood there, her expression a mixture of disbelief and regret, her body tense as if she was waiting for something. But there was nothing left to say. There was no magic word she could say to fix this. No amount of pleading would change what had happened. I walked past her, heading for the front door. I couldn't look back. "I don't want to see you again," I said, my voice barely audible, and I left. I walked out into the night, leaving Naomi behind in the house we once shared. The weight of everything that had just happened settled over me, suffocating me, but I knew I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to let her disrespect me anymore. The moment Naomi walked out the door, I felt the weight of my decision. But as I sat in the silence of the house, a new reality began to sink in, one I hadn't truly allowed myself to consider. Our children, Emily and Josh, were the ones who would suffer the most. I'd always prided myself on being a good father, the kind of dad who showed up, who made time for his kids no matter how busy work got. Emily, my daughter, had always been my little shadow. We would spend hours working on my old cars in the garage or just talking about life. But now I could already see how things were beginning to change, how Naomi's choices were turning their world upside down. Emily especially was struggling. The night Naomi left, she had stayed up late sitting in the kitchen with me, asking questions that I didn't have answers to. She wasn't angry. She was just confused, unsure about what was happening to the family she had always known. She had asked me why her mother had chosen to go out with Clarence, and all I could do was sit there in silence. How could I explain to her that the woman she looked up to had betrayed me and her? How could I explain that everything we had built was now a lie? I tried to keep things normal for her, I kept up appearances, making her breakfast every morning, taking her to school. But the tension in the air was palpable. Emily could sense it. The questions in her eyes were like daggers, but she never asked again. Instead, she pulled away, retreating into herself, and I felt more helpless than I ever had. Josh, on the other hand, was different. He was always a bit more reserved, more pragmatic, but he was also closer to Naomi. He had spent the past few weeks clinging to her, his quiet nature masking the growing confusion in his heart. I watched as he tried to navigate the situation, not fully understanding what was happening, but knowing enough to feel the shift in the air. He began asking questions that cut to the core. "Dad, why is Mom acting so different? Why doesn't she care about us anymore?" It was like being punched in the gut every time he spoke. I couldn't lie to him, but how do you explain something so painful to a teenager? How do you explain that the person who was supposed to love him above all else was now choosing someone else over him? I sat with Josh in the living room that evening, the same room where Naomi had come home that morning, thinking everything was fine. It was strange, sitting there without her presence, yet still feeling like she was in the room. "You okay, son?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me for a moment, then shook his head. "No, Dad, I'm not. I don't understand any of this. Why did Mom leave? Why didn't she tell me what was going on?" I wanted to tell him that everything would be fine, that we would get through this as a family. But I couldn't. It wasn't true. How could I tell him that when I wasn't sure if Naomi would even come back? When I wasn't sure if our family could ever be the same? "I don't have all the answers, Josh," I said quietly. "Your mom made some choices that I can't control. But I'm here, and I always will be. You don't have to go through this alone." He nodded slowly, his eyes cast down at his hands. For a moment I thought he might say something more, but he didn't. Instead, he stood up and walked away. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I was left alone with my thoughts, with the guilt that I was failing my children. I was supposed to protect them, to shield them from the hurt that was threatening to tear our family apart. But there was no shield anymore. The damage had been done, and I couldn't fix it. As the days passed, I began to see the changes in them. Emily's grades started slipping. She became withdrawn, barely talking to me or to Josh. She didn't want to spend time with me in the garage anymore. She would go to her room, lock the door, and stay there for hours, lost in the silence that mirrored my own. Josh, too, became more distant, his mood shifting unpredictably. Sometimes he would lash out, angry at the world for reasons he couldn't articulate. Other times he would be eerily quiet, as if he were trying to hold everything together. I watched both of them helpless, knowing that whatever happened next would shape who they became. One night, after dinner, I caught Emily staring at the family photo on the wall, the one where we all looked so happy, so perfect. She didn't notice me standing there, but I saw the sadness in her eyes, the longing for something that was gone. When she turned to me, her voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, why did Mom do it?" Her eyes were filled with hurt, and I could see the pain that was starting to take root in her heart. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain to her that Naomi had made a choice that broke our family apart? How could I explain to her that I was as lost as she was? "I don't know, sweetheart," I said finally, my voice cracking. "But I do know this. I love you. And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." She didn't say anything else. Instead, she just nodded, and I could see the walls she had built around her heart. I wasn't sure how to break them down, but I knew I had to try. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of what was happening to my family pressed heavily on my chest. Naomi had caused this. Her actions had changed everything. And now it was up to me to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't sure I was strong enough to do it. Not alone. The divorce papers arrived on a Friday morning, and for the first time since Naomi's betrayal, I felt like I could finally breathe. The weight of her lies, the years of gaslighting, and the silence between us, everything felt like it had been building to this moment. Yet, as I sat there staring at the papers, something gnawed at me. This wasn't the release I had hoped for. It was a hollow victory. The house felt like a battlefield. Every room carried the echoes of what used to be. Emily had retreated further into herself, her room a sanctuary from the pain, and Josh, though outwardly distant, was still struggling with the reality of the situation. I had expected anger from them, but instead, there was an almost unbearable quietness, as if they too had given up on the idea of us as a family. I had told myself that I would fight the divorce tooth and nail. After all, Naomi's actions had torn our family apart, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. But the truth was, I didn't have the fight in me anymore. I had already given so much to this marriage, so much of myself, and Naomi had drained everything out of me. The paperwork didn't sting anymore. It was just the final chapter in a story I'd been trying to rewrite for months. The lawyer's voice on the other end of the phone was clinical, impersonal. We discussed the division of assets, the custody of the kids, and the inevitable child support payments. It felt like a negotiation over property, not a dissolution of a life built together. It was nothing more than numbers, percentages, and cold calculations. Naomi would get the house, the kids, and a chunk of my income for the next 5 years. And I would be left with a life that I had no idea how to rebuild. Naomi called me later that afternoon, her voice smooth, almost too calm. "I got the papers," she said, as if we were simply discussing the weather. "You've been served, I see. It's official now." "Yeah," I replied, the bitterness in my voice barely concealed. "It's official." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the subtle hint of regret in her voice, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. "I still think we can fix this, Jack," she said, her tone softening. "We can go to counseling. We don't have to throw everything away." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that the years of pretending, the years of compromise and forgiveness, were gone. "No, Naomi, it's too late. You crossed a line that I can't come back from. You broke our family. You broke me." She didn't respond at first. Then I heard her take a deep breath. "I know," she whispered. "I never wanted this, Jack, but I don't know how to fix it. I've made a mess of everything." Her words hit me, but they didn't move me anymore. They were just words. She had told me she loved me, but love had never been enough. It wasn't enough to keep her from going out and sleeping with another man. Love didn't mean anything when you were willing to destroy everything just to feel validated. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Naomi. I'm just trying to get through this." My voice was steady, but underneath it the anger, the hurt, and the disappointment swirled. "And I'm not doing this for you anymore. I'm doing this for me, for the kids." Another long silence. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "I just want you to know, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." But she did. That was the truth. Naomi had hurt me. She had hurt the kids, and she had hurt herself. She had broken our family. And no amount of regret, no amount of, "I didn't mean to," would fix what had been done. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, lawyers, and meetings. The house felt more and more like a prison. Emily was silent, her eyes hollow with sadness, and Josh seemed to retreat even further, as if he were waiting for the storm to pass. I couldn't blame them. I was waiting for the storm to pass too. But the storm didn't pass. It hung over us, clouding everything. I didn't know how to explain to them why their mother had done what she did. I didn't know how to make them understand that none of this was their fault. How could I explain to them that the woman who had promised to love me forever had thrown it all away for someone else? In the end, the divorce was granted. Naomi kept the house, the kids, and the majority of the assets. I was left with a house I didn't want, a future I couldn't see, and an empty bank account. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of trying to put the pieces of a broken life back together. Naomi tried to keep things civil after the divorce, but I couldn't bring myself to even look at her. She moved Clarence in almost immediately, and I heard through the grapevine that they were talking about getting married. The news didn't affect me as much as I thought it would. It had no power over me anymore. The real battle, though, was with Emily and Josh. They became distant. Emily especially seemed to blame me for the breakdown of the family. "You're the one who made her leave," she said one night, her eyes filled with confusion and anger. I didn't know how to respond. How could I tell her that it wasn't me who left? How could I tell her that it wasn't my choice? The only thing I could do was keep trying, keep being there for them, even though they didn't want to hear it. And as the months passed, I realized something. The pain, the anger, it would eventually fade. But the consequences of Naomi's actions would last forever. It had been months since the divorce was finalized, and life, though still heavy with the consequences of Naomi's betrayal, had started to find its rhythm. Emily and Josh were both dealing with their own versions of the fallout, but I was adjusting to the new normal. I had my work, my projects at the house, and my own space, a small but significant piece of freedom that came with the price of everything I had lost. Then one evening, as I was sitting in the living room, reading through some old letters from friends, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Carly. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year. Since the wedding, she had distanced herself from me. No calls, no texts, not even a birthday wish. She had sided with Naomi, blaming me for tearing apart the family, as if I was the one who had cheated. I opened the message with hesitation, unsure of what to expect. The words on the screen were simple. "Dad, I need to talk. Can I come over?" I read the message again. My mind raced. Why now? What had changed? Had she finally realized what had happened? I didn't know, but the pain of the years I had spent trying to maintain a relationship with her, only to be shut out, came rushing back. I thought about the letter I had sent her on her birthday, the one that had been returned unopened. I thought about all the missed opportunities to reconnect, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was ready to face the reality of her feelings. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stood there, staring at the phone. It felt like a lifetime since we had been close, since she had been the little girl who looked up to me. A part of me wanted to push her away, to protect myself from the hurt of her rejection. But another part, the father who still loved her despite everything, wanted to open the door and let her in, if only for a chance to heal the wounds she had helped create. Finally, I sent a short reply. "Sure, I'll be here." It felt strange. The house, which had felt so empty for so long, suddenly seemed to hold too much space. I didn't know what to expect when Carly arrived, but I knew I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Things weren't fine, but they didn't have to stay broken. When she walked through the door, it was like nothing had changed. Her presence was familiar, yet there was a distance between us that couldn't be ignored. She stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at me. I tried to smile, but it felt awkward. I couldn't help but notice the way she looked at me now, like I was a stranger she wasn't sure how to approach. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly, her voice laced with hesitation. "Hey, sweetie," I replied, standing up from the couch. "It's good to see you." She nodded, but the smile she offered was thin, more of a gesture than genuine warmth. She was holding something back, and I could feel it, as if there were an invisible barrier between us, one I wasn't sure how to cross. We sat down, and for a while neither of us said anything. It felt like we were waiting for something to happen, for the ice to break, but neither of us knew how to start. Finally, Carly spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I wanted to talk to you. I don't know where to begin." Her words were quiet, but they carried the weight of years. I nodded, letting her take her time. I wasn't going to push her, not now. "I don't know what to say, Dad. I thought I was doing the right thing, you know? I thought I was standing by Mom, and I didn't realize how much it hurt you. I didn't see it, but I see it now." My chest tightened at the sound of her voice, at the vulnerability that was so rare for her. It took me a moment to respond, to find the right words. "You don't have to apologize, Carly," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "You were just a kid. I know that. I know you were hurt too. I get it. I'm just glad you're here now." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry for blaming you. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I was angry, or maybe because it was easier than facing the truth. But I see it now. I see how much Mom hurt you, and how much she hurt all of us." The admission hit me like a wave, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I had spent so many months feeling abandoned by her, thinking that she would never come around. To hear her say those words, to hear her acknowledge the truth, it was more than I had ever hoped for. I didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing more to say. The weight of those years had lifted slightly, but it wasn't gone. Nothing would ever make everything right again. The damage Naomi had done to our family was irreparable. But this moment with Carly was something I hadn't expected. It was a small but significant step forward. "You don't need to carry that guilt, Carly," I finally said. "I never wanted you to feel like you had to choose sides. I just wanted you to know that I've always loved you, and I always will." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know, Dad. I know." We sat there for a while longer, just talking. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Carly and I still had a long way to go to rebuild our relationship, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope. As Carly left that night, I watched her walk out the door. There was still so much hurt between us, but I realized something in that moment. I hadn't lost her, not completely, and maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal piece by piece. What do you think of Jack's journey through betrayal and heartbreak? Do you think he made the right choices? From which region are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on our latest stories. Don't forget to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.